So good morning, everyone. As you have already heard from, everyone at the Weather Service and Nate, August 15th is definitely a day that will be forever burned into our memories. I myself was about an hour out of town and I got my first phone call. Can everyone see my screen just to make sure?
We can.
Okay, great. So I got the phone call probably about 8 o'clock from our fire chief letting me know that we were having some severe flooding up in the northern end of our county. Water rescues were going on flooded roads, and we've seen it a time or six this year already. So it was a monitoring status with public safety running calls. I was starting to kind of plan for our usual areas like apartment complexes that normally flood. Getting ready to call up some of our county partners if we were going to evacuate apartment complexes, how to get people where they need to go out of the storm, out of the rain, get them some temporary help. And it started going downhill real quick. This was definitely a no-notice event that escalated way quicker than what we had anticipated. So this picture right up here on the top left, that's the water rescue on Otterdale Road. That was actually one of the first, that happened earlier in the morning, probably, 9 o'clock-ish. Our response, our calls went through the roof. The Emergency Communications Center received 732 911 calls that day, and over 2,000 calls of non-emergency and administrative nature were placed and received. We had 178 fire and EMS incidents, which was up 66% than normal. 11 above water rescues, and then of course when we talk about the evacuations, the fire department assisted with that. Police, they were closing down roads left and right. Down here, there's a picture of Spring Run Road while it was completely flooded. This picture below the water rescue in Otterdale, that was from the other end where the police had the road blocked off as the rescue was going on. And then over here, Cloverleaf Lake Apartments, this is what I was really focusing on first thing in the morning. Normally when we get significant rain, we have to get people out of there. We evacuate some of the apartments. So that's kind of what I was focusing on, trying to think ahead of, these just smaller isolated evacuations and just kind of keeping my pulse on the public safety aspect of this incident. However, about 11 o'clock in the morning, I received another phone call that our Addison Evans water treatment facility was now flooding because the Swift Creek Reservoir Dam was overtopping, and we were having flooding across Whole Street, and Addison Evans was now flooding. I have pictures of Addison Evans here in a little bit. So really initially the major impacts were transportation issues. Water closed down a lot of roads. We had right around 60, maybe a few more roads that were impassable, including major highways. Powhite, Chippenham, they were impassable at a point in time. This map here, every blue dot shows you where there were closed road segments because of the flooding. And truly, we did see it start up here in like the northern end of the county, and it really moved south as the day progressed. So the calls we were getting, the runoff and all the rain that just kind of sat over top of us really did move just kind of in a wave down the county. We started tracking road closures through maps mid-afternoon, and our communications folks were releasing those via Facebook. Police were releasing photos of the closed roads over social media to give people a sense of the true, situation, the full gravity of the situation. Because we all know people like to still try and tempt driving on flooded roads. We did send out some messaging over Chesterfield Alert, including a link to 511 for road closures. And then normally when we have severe weather, our Parks and Recreation Environmental Engineering departments, they pull together resources and equipment to help us do road clearing. Now, of course, there was not a lot of wind associated with this event, so there were only 14 trees down, but great example of how we utilize other departments to kind of alleviate some of the workload off of our public safety and first responders so that they can deal with the life threat issues. There is a picture of Spring Run that day. The Falling Creek Reservoir Dam, that was another fun, rapidly escalating situation. It was amazing to me to watch a video that came in early afternoon. This was really, we were only at stage 1 of a dock, an 18 by 20 foot wooden dock, come over top of this spillway over here with all the water. And it looked so tiny in comparison. It was amazing. And when we started seeing Falling Creek rise, knowing what Swift Creek Reservoir was doing up in the northern end of the county, we knew it was coming downstream. We started positioning resources and assets. You know, my question to utilities and police were, you know, are we going to have to evacuate? Because we know that as soon as that dam hits stage 3, it calls for an automatic evacuation of the Falling Creek area per the EAP. What really made it difficult for us, you know, we had the Addison Evans water treatment plant, which, you know, I'll talk specifically about that later, but that's a picture from a drone the day after. So this is actually receded a bit when that picture was taken, but we were watching 6 different dams that were at stage 2. The high hazards were at stage 2 or stage 3. Like Nate said, Beaver Lake is not a high hazard, it's unregulated, but Woodland Pond started calling. They made it to stage 2. Swift Creek, of course, Swift Creek Reservoir, Falling Creek, Swift Creek Pocahontas, and then about 11:30 that night, we got a message from Colonial Heights saying that the Lakeview Dam was, they thought that that was going to completely breach. So that added even more, you know, work to us, because we still, even though Lakeview's in Colonial Heights, we still have residents on the backside of that inundation zone that are affected. Of course, our water treatment facility and sanitary sewer plants were also suffered significant damage. So the evacuation, like I said, this was a rapidly escalating situation. The last time we evacuated Falling Creek was 2004 during Hurricane Gaston. We received, you know, I kept asking about Falling Creek, you know, where are we at? Are we going to have to evacuate? Trying to anticipate. And I put our shelter team on notice. And really, I'm so thankful for the Hurricane ECEs like 2 weeks prior, because we really solidified our COVID sheltering plan for that specific event. So I want to say it was within an hour of being told, yeah, we're in stage 1 for Falling Creek, to getting the phone call from our emergency communication center saying, hey, Jess, we're at stage 3. And from police going, hey, that's, you know, that's an automatic evacuation. Let's roll. And okay, that's great. So really within, I would say 20 minutes, because we had already pre-positioned assets, knowing how quickly the water was rising. The dam got to about 103 feet. We were able to execute and start mobilizing operations quickly. We had police pre-positioned, their special response unit officers. They had an officer on the dam to provide overwatch. They called in for additional resources from fire. And I had already put the shelter team on standby so that they could quickly mobilize. We started the evacuation. Police put out the evacuation order. IPAWS for us is a relatively new piece of technology. We looked at sending out an IPAWS message for that area. However, what we found was the inundation map was really hard to read in the plan. So it was really difficult to see exactly where that area was going to, you know, where we needed to hit to be really focused. But also considering it's COVID, we didn't want to create a lot of panic either. by saying, you know, you need to evacuate. And we knew police and fire were going to go door to door anyhow. So it was decided that instead of trying to, you know, mitigate issues from a lot of people running to a shelter with COVID, we would continue with the door to door. One of the biggest lessons learned that we're going to try and go back on is really getting some good inundation maps that are easy to read, because police and fire had to go off of those maps as well as they were evacuating. So 12 two-man teams. So we teamed up one police officer and one firefighter. The reason why we did that was because, you know, sometimes people, you know, when you have a police officer knocking at your door, we didn't want people to be frightened and worried about legal concerns. So we had a fireman and a police officer together, notifying the residents of the evacuation, and then they would call over the radio the address that they had just knocked on, and then the status of their the status of what those people were doing. We ran this whole operation on Teams, so everything was virtual. We did not have any physical EOC open, primarily because, you know, we knew, okay, well, COVID is a thing, and we've been doing virtual EOC operations the whole year, but we knew that the majority of people that needed to respond were going to probably get stuck in floodwater, and it would take them longer to try and navigate around those road closures to get to a central location, and we didn't have that time. So in our teams, we tracked the evacuation status by address. We did put in VDEM, we put in VDOT, hindsight, should have put in the National Weather Service, DCR, Pocahontas, all those folks as well. But that's been a really great strategy for us with incidents, especially ones like this where it is so hard to provide timely updates because you're moving so quickly. You know, now our partners with the state and our external agency partners, they can see what's going on in real time in Teams. So the Meadowbrook High School here in the eastern end of the county, which is closest to Falling Creek, was open for evacuees. Our team stood that shelter up in 30 minutes. So again, that just goes to, you know, lends credibility to, hey, position, you know, position, try to get those early trigger points to pre-position and put your assets on standby, because we didn't really have time to wait an hour and a half, 2 hours. When they started calling over the radio the statuses of evacuees, everyone was going to the shelter. And in the first 20 minutes, we were tracking about 100 people coming to that shelter. And we got on the phone with the mass care team and with schools. We said, look, we need to identify a secondary location with secondary shelter teams just in case you become overrun quickly. Because again, COVID limits our capacity. We did have our shelter set up to have an area for families who were either screened positive. We were doing screenings at the door. The health department was there to do that, to, you know, put those folks in one section, either presumptive positive or had been diagnosed as positive. We had another section for the non-COVID families. Only 19 evacuees, though, arrived at the shelter, and only 4 stayed overnight. So that was actually a really great thing, because in our shelter plan, the schools are responsible for feeding our evacuees. Well, schools haven't been in session since March. So guess what wasn't in the school? Food. So we had to get food brought in, which was no problem at all. But that was, you know, one of those things that we had to, you know, that we realized on the fly. And then, of course, our animal services folks, they were awesome. They got right up and at it and responded immediately. They opened up the shelter so we could take in evacuated pets, because what we do know is, you know, people aren't going to leave their pets. So we want everyone to get out. So therefore, we, you know, made sure that we had our animal services folks ready to accept those pets. Now you're going to see the Falling Creek evacuation here, total homes 286. Now, to be honest, that's just through the plan, okay? 286 homes. Police actually decided to expand that a little bit more, because with the inundation zone, you know, one house would be in the inundation zone, and then the next house really wouldn't be, but there was still, you know, we wanted to make sure they were aware. So in total, about 400 doors were knocked on in less than, I would say, about 5.5 hours. The evacuations concluded around midnight. You see here, 25% of the residents stayed. So, that was something that, we want to look back and go, oh, wow, how do we help decrease that number? Evacuated 100, about half of the homes did evacuate, and another quarter, nobody answered the door. Whether they were home or not, who knows? But nobody answered that door. So the Addison Evans plant, again, this, if y'all might remember, you're in this area, it flooded pretty good during Tropical Storm Michael back in 2018. This time, they actually had to evacuate the workers out of the water treatment facility by boat because it rose so quickly. The full basement was underwater, and then 4 feet on in the first floor offices. So it was completely flooded out. They lost their SCADA system, which of course is the system that helps monitor, the dams and monitor. That was monitoring the Falling Creek Dam, because our utilities department is the dam owner for, over here, but for Falling Creek. But they couldn't monitor that Falling Creek dam because their SCADA system went out with the flood. So luckily, they did have a webcam that they were able to position near Falling Creek to kind of monitor that. But really, Falling Creek was monitored all in person overnight. We brought in large lights because the gauge was actually really hard to see from a safe distance. So one of the after action items is where utilities is going to be moving the gauge, making putting a more prominent gauge out there. So because our folks were having to get out on top of the dam to go see what the water level was. So of course, we ran pretty much all evening. We started about 8 o'clock in the morning. We ran solid until 1:30. I think I got off my team's meeting with the evacuation guys about 1:30 in the morning. We sent officers out. Like I said, Lakeview Dam, we did send officers out to a couple residents that would be impacted by the Lakeview Dam as pretty much like a welfare check to let them know that, hey, this dam is not looking so great. And if it breaks, you are in the inundation zone. But where they were at in the inundation zone, they weren't going to, they weren't going to be washed away, luckily. So then the next day, the water receded about, I would say about 10:30. Dam engineers looked at the Falling Creek Dam, deemed it safe, and we were able to allow people to go back home. And then later that evening, just, as you take a deep breath and go, okay, we got through, we got through it. We received word that the Jank Road pump station, which was now feeding our folks in absence of the Addison Evans plant, was shut down because of flooding. So that also created some difficulties because we only had so much water to make sure that that section of the county, the northern end of the county, was properly served. So emergency water restrictions were established. So of course that news release went out. We also put that out over Chesterfield Alert. And then 5 days later, the water restrictions were lifted. The good news is we did not have any customers that went without water. Everybody really got on board with the water restrictions and did their part, and we were super happy that they did that because we were trying to go through our different scenarios of how, if we lost water to that area, how we would make sure our residents got the water they needed. So Addison Evans actually, after the Tropical Storm Michael flood, applied for a mitigation grant to put a flood wall up. And on this slide, just a few tidbits about that grant, but really, they aren't even expecting final grant approval until next year. And the project isn't expected to be completed until 2023 or 24. So that's, from incident number 1 that triggered them to put in this grant for this flood wall. That's what, 5, almost 6 years between, event and then solution. So, and we just saw that we flooded even worse, not even 2 years later. So here again, here is the Addison Evans Water Treatment Facility back here. This is the runoff from the Swift Creek Reservoir. You know, only Chesterfield and Colonial Heights declared states of emergency. And of course, as we know, when we start talking about recovery and whatnot, there was no state declaration, which means there's no federal money. So BDEM has been really great. They worked with us to, look at the state public assistance program. Our local threshold is 1.26, but by the 19th, so 3 days later, we were already estimating $2.8 million of damage, and we now sit at 3.3 million. Addison Evans is still not back up online, but the utilities department, I can't give them enough credit. They had a really rough couple of days and couple of weeks, and they're really they really worked hard to keep us informed. It was great, working with Nate at Pocahontas. You get to know your dam owners real quick. So really, what some of the lessons that we learned was people are still going to move these road closed signs for flooded roads. We found a lot of them in ditches. People still drove around them. It doesn't matter. You can put pictures out there, you can put the warnings out there, but people still do it. And then the evacuation. So how do we get our residents to really heed these warnings when it comes to high water? With dams, something that, we really never thought of, because we really never thought we were going to have so many dams be in jeopardy or be at that emergency level, those emergency stages all at one time. And, looking back after it all ended, we were kind of wondering if we had to do evacuations for even one more dam or two more dams, our resources were already strained. What was that going to look like? So, those considerations, the what ifs, and of course, 2020, we all joke about, next inject, like nothing is off limits now with exercises. You can't say that's never going to happen, because we really never thought we were going to have to, we hadn't opened a shelter since 2011 overnight. And here we are, the year of the pandemic, having to evacuate because of a dam. So definitely, get familiar with your dam plans, your dam owners, participate in those tabletop exercises whenever possible. And if your inundation mapping is really hard to read, work to make the mapping more manageable. I know that when we kind of go back and look at our evacuation procedures and plans, we're going to take the inundation maps, break it down into zones, so it's easier for our, personnel that are going door to door to manage. We are going to work with our IST folks and with our emergency notification folks to hopefully upload the inundation map layers into Everbridge so that we can push out easier notifications that are more automated. We're not taking up that time to try and figure out where those boundaries are. So we've got a lot of great after action items to really work through to make this a lot easier on us. Hopefully, like Nate said, an incident of this magnitude hopefully never happens again, but if it does, we've learned a lot of great lessons for it. So I will take any questions, and I really appreciate you guys, hearing the Chesterfield story. Everyone was wonderful, and I want to thank everyone who helped us that night and who stayed up late hours and got us all the information we needed. So
Really great, Jess. Thank you so much for that. We do have a question here. After action wise, was there one process you wish you had started sooner? And if so, why?
Started sooner, honestly, I think that goes back to notifications and warnings. Have a really good understanding of your technology, who's capable of using that technology, and have good policies and procedures in place. Using the Everbridge system and iPods, I think, that's something I think we should have probably started a little sooner. Otherwise, maybe getting the team's EOC set up a little sooner. but we really, we really thought it was going to be a public safety incident. We didn't know that the rain wasn't going to move. So getting that EOC set up, that was like slingshot, was EOC and getting people notified, because we declared about 12 o'clock that day after we realized Addison Evans was underwater. We didn't declare before then, and we had no idea what was coming. So I see expand upon the components of teams that you utilized for the incident. If you don't mind, are you able to see, is it still my presentation, or are you able to see the team?
Yep, we got you.
Okay, so if it's okay with you guys, I'm going to show the teams here, just so I can.
Yeah, sure.
Let me see. Okay. All right. So do you guys see the teams now? Oh wait, let me hit the share button. You gotta hit the share button first.
Yep, that's the one. Yep.
Okay.
Gotcha. Yep.
Perfect. So like I said, the pandemic really threw us into the world of virtual EOC operations. This is what our team looked like for the flood. So we had our general channel. We had a channel for call center, which we actually did not set up that day. We did have a virtual call center for the pandemic, but with a no notice event, setting up that call center was just not going to happen. Our communication channel was for all of our PIOs and external affairs. So we had county PIOs, we had our public safety PIOs. These were the different channels. We were trying to go with the community lifelines, and actually we realized that community lifelines are great for situational awareness, but for us to run an EOC, not necessarily very easy, especially for folks who aren't trained in community lifelines yet, because they're relatively new. We had our food, water, shelter. So here's everybody that is talking about, anything that had to do with utilities, the water, the shelter. We had our planning channel. So Chad Vaughn, he's a captain here in fire. He went to the Emergency Communication Center to help, not only direct resources, but he was keeping count of our evacuations. So this is what our evacuation looked like. And we were getting basically 15-minute updates on the progress and the percentage. Teams, we do put in a recovery channel so we can keep everything start to finish. But we had, I really, looking back, would have liked to have put the National Weather Service and DCR in here as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's what our EOC looked like, and we were all virtual. Text messages were flying, chats were flying, so it worked.
Great.